When you picture an ancient Roman dinner, what comes to mind? Lavish feasts, right? Senators reclining on couches, being hand-fed grapes, while servants bring out platters of what? Roasted dormice, stuffed peacocks, an endless flow of wine poured from ornate jugs. It's a powerful image, immortalized in movies and TV shows. It speaks of incredible luxury, decadence, and an empire so powerful it could afford to eat the most exotic foods imaginable. But what if I told you that for 99% of the people living under Roman rule, this picture is pure fantasy? What if the real diet of a Roman legionary marching to the edge of the known world, a humble farmer tilling his field, or a craftsman living in a crowded city apartment was something else entirely? The truth is, the real Roman diet was simpler, more practical, and in many ways, the secret ingredient that fueled one of the greatest empires in history. The food that built the Colosseum and conquered continents. It was humble, hearty, and designed for survival. So, in this video, we're going on a culinary journey back in time. We're going to sift through the myths, uncover the historical evidence, and find out what the Romans really ate. We'll explore the three core foods that formed the bedrock of their world, discover the smelly, salty condiment they put on absolutely everything, and yes, we'll even find out if anyone actually ate those dormice. This is the real story of the Roman appetite. So if the average Roman wasn't dining on exotic beasts, what filled their plates? The answer lies in three simple yet profoundly important staples, known to historians as the Mediterranean triad: grains, grapes, and olives. This wasn't just food, this was the fuel of the Republic and the Empire, the very foundation of Roman life and power. Let's start with grains, the undisputed king of the Roman diet. The Latin word was frumentum, and it was the civilization's lifeblood. For the earliest Romans, and for the poor throughout Roman history, wheat wasn't eaten in fluffy loaves of bread, but in a thick, hearty porridge called pulse. Think of it as a form of polenta. This was the ancestral food of Rome. A humble mush that could be jazzed up with whatever was on hand, a little salt, some herbs, a bit of cheese, or some chopped vegetables. It was cheap, filling, and provided the raw calories needed for a hard day's labor. Bread, or impanis, certainly became more common later, especially in the cities. Massive public bakeries, often powered by donkeys turning giant millstones, churned out loaves for the populace. The Roman state understood the importance of bread so well that it implemented the cura annoni, or the grain dole, a free monthly supply of grain for hundreds of thousands of Roman citizens. This wasn't just charity, it was a political tool to prevent riots and keep the massive, often restless, population of Rome fed and content. For the soldier, grain was transformed into bucellatum, a rock-hard, twice-baked biscuit, like military hardtack. It was durable, easy to carry, and provided the essential energy for a legion on the march. Next in the triad, grapes, or more specifically, wine. Wine in ancient Rome was a democratic drink, consumed by everyone from the emperor to the lowliest slave. But they had one golden rule: you never drank it straight. To a Roman, drinking undiluted wine was the mark of a barbarian. It was always mixed with water, often warm water, to make it safer to drink and to make the supply last longer. The most common drink for a soldier wasn't a fine vintage, but posca, a cheap, sour wine mixed with water and herbs, essentially a type of vinegar. It sounds unappetizing, but it was incredibly practical. The acidity helped kill bacteria in questionable water sources, making it a healthy and hydrating drink that quenched thirst, far better than plain water. Finally, we have the olive, the provider of what they called liquid gold. Olive oil was as essential as grain. It was a primary source of fat and calories, used for cooking and drizzled over bread and vegetables as a condiment. But its importance went far beyond the kitchen. It was the main fuel for terracotta lamps that lit Roman homes after dark. it was also their soap. Romans would cover their bodies in oil at the bathhouses and then scrape it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil, removing dirt and sweat. This single fruit provided food, light and hygiene, making it an indispensable cornerstone of daily life across the entire empire. These three things, grain porridge, diluted wine, and olive oil, were the true Roman feast. A diet of bread, porridge, wine, and oil could provide the calories to survive, but an empire is built on strength. That required protein. This brings us back to those cinematic feasts of giant, roasted beasts. While a wealthy senator might enjoy a lavish roast at a banquet, the daily reality for the average person was far different. Meat was a valued, but often scarce, commodity. So what was the go-to meat of the Roman world? It wasn't beef or lamb, it was pork. The pig was the perfect animal for the Roman food system. Pigs are incredibly efficient to raise, they mature quickly, and they don't require vast pastures for grazing like cattle. They could be kept in backyards or forests, feeding on scraps and forage. Most importantly, pork was exceptionally well suited for preservation. Without refrigeration, being able to salt, smoke, and cure meat was essential. Salted pork was the Roman equivalent of bacon and ham, a staple that could be stored for long periods and transported across the empire. It was a critical part of a legionary's rations, providing a boost of morale and much-needed protein and fat during long campaigns. Chicken and other poultry were also common, as were goat and mutton, especially in more rural areas. But what about beef? A juicy steak was an extreme rarity. Cattle were simply too valuable alive. A cow or an ox was a living tractor, essential for ploughing the fields that produced the empire's grain. To slaughter one for a regular meal would be like a modern farmer dismantling his John Deere for a hamburger. Beef was typically only eaten during special religious festivals, after an animal had been sacrificed to the gods. Only then would the meat be distributed among the community, making it a truly special occasion. However, the single most important source of savory flavor in the Roman world wasn't meat at all. It was a pungent, powerful, and now infamous condiment called garum. Forget ketchup or mustard. Garum was everything to the Roman palate. It was a fermented fish sauce made by layering fish guts, blood, and whole small fish like anchovies and mackerel with enormous amounts of salt in large vats. These vats were then left to bake in the Mediterranean sun for weeks or months. The enzymes from the fish intestines would break down the tissues, creating a protein-rich, salty liquid that was then drained off, filtered, and bottled. While it sounds disgusting, the final product was a complex, umami-rich flavor enhancer, much like modern soy sauce or high-end Asian fish sauces. Romans put it on everything. They drizzled it into their pulse, used it to dress vegetables, and mixed it with wine and oil to create marinades and sauces. It was a massive industry, with famous production centers in Pompeii and Spain, and its trade connected the entire Roman world in a shared, fishy flavor. A Roman meal wasn't just grains and protein. To provide vitamins, fiber, and variety, Romans relied heavily on the produce of their gardens and farms. While we might imagine overflowing baskets of colorful exotic produce, the reality, once again, was far more practical and seasonal. The Roman vegetable garden was filled with hardy, reliable crops that could thrive in the Mediterranean climate. At the top of the list were humble but essential vegetables like cabbage, onions, and garlic. The Roman statesman Cato the Elder famously declared cabbage to be the best vegetable in the world, believing it had medicinal properties for all sorts of ailments. Alongside these, you'd find plenty of leeks, turnips, radishes, and celery. For most people, these vegetables would be simply boiled and added to a soup or the ever-present pulse porridge, providing texture and nutrients. The wealthy might enjoy them as a side dish, perhaps lightly cooked and dressed with a fine olive oil, vinegar, and a dash of that prized garum. Just as important, especially for the lower classes, were legumes. In a world where meat was a luxury, lentils, chickpeas, fava beans and peas were the protein workhorses of the Roman diet. They were often called the poor man's meat for good reason. They were cheap to grow, incredibly nutritious, and most importantly, they could be dried and stored for months. This made them a vital source of food security, ensuring there was always something to eat during the lean winter months or when other crops failed. A thick lentil stew or a simple chickpea soup was a staple meal for millions, providing the sustenance needed to get through the day. When it came to fruit, Romans enjoyed nature's sweetness, but their options were different from what you might find in a modern Italian market. The most common fruits were those that grew easily around the Mediterranean. Grapes, of course, eaten fresh from the vine. Figs, which were a particular favorite, and could be dried to create a sweet, energy-packed snack, as well as apples, pears, and plums. But here we encounter another myth. The fruits we often associate with Italy today were largely absent. Oranges and lemons were exotic, incredibly expensive novelties from the Far East, if they were known at all. And the most famous Italian ingredient of all, the tomato, was completely unknown to the ancient Romans. It would only arrive from the Americas more than 1,000 years after the fall of Rome. The real Roman plate was a world without tomato sauce, a simple but important fact that changes our entire picture of their cuisine. So, if the real Roman diet was built on humble porridge, salted pork and beans, where did all the wild stories come from? If the average person wasn't eating them, who was feasting on stuffed dormice and peacock brains? The simple answer is the 1%. Those lavish, almost unbelievable banquets were very real, but they were the exclusive domain of Rome's ultra-wealthy elite. They were not meals. They were spectacular theatrical performances designed for one purpose: to flaunt unimaginable wealth and social status. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a billionaire covering a supercar in diamonds. It's not practical, but it sends a powerful message. For the Roman elite, food was the ultimate stage for this kind of one-upmanship. The host of a dinner party, or cena, would compete to serve the most shocking, expensive and exotic dishes to astound their guests and rivals. And this is where we finally meet our most famous, mythical food, the dormouse. Yes, some wealthy Romans really did eat them. Specifically, they ate a species called the edible dormouse, or glis glis. These weren't common pests, they were a cultivated delicacy. The Romans would raise them in large terracotta jars called gliraria, which had little shelves for the animals to run on and holes for ventilation. They would be fattened on a rich diet of walnuts, chestnuts, and acorns. Once plump, they were prepared in various ways, most famously being stuffed with minced pork and spices, then baked or fried. Sometimes they were even served as a dessert, glazed in honey and rolled in poppy seeds, but the dormouse was just the appetizer. These feasts were culinary theater, designed to be talked about across the city. The true diet of Rome was not one of fantasy, but one of profound function. It may not sound glamorous, but this humble menu was in fact one of Rome's most powerful secret weapons. Its simplicity was its genius. This was a food system that was scalable, transportable, and incredibly efficient. So, let me know which side of the Roman menu you find more interesting in the comments below. And if you enjoyed separating Roman fact from fiction, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into the ancient world. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.